of all, thank you for letting me interview you.
You're welcome.
So as I was saying, my questions primarily revolve around U.S. actions abroad and internally. And just for reference, from what I understand, imperialism is defined as the acquisition of territory or political and cultural power through the use of force. So it's not just limited to like the British Empire, but also like the expansion of British culture around the world at the detriment of like Indian culture and South African culture, etc.
Sure.
So my first question is, have you ever witnessed...
Miss Sanford, call the main office. Miss Sanford, call the main office.
Okay. Have you ever witnessed or experienced American imperialist policies or like the profusion or the furthering of American culture abroad, whether in like Ghana or in South Korea?
Yeah, I mean, so if you're speaking just culturally, I would say that right now South Korea is at an interesting cultural crossroads, and a lot of it has to do with the influence of American culture, in particular the idea of kind of the individuality that American culture celebrates. So South Korea has traditionally been a Confucius culture, and so one's place in society is really defined by the group and subgroups that they belong to, and one's identity is not necessarily found in themselves, but found in, you know, their last name, their really their family, right? That's why in Korea their last name goes first, and then their family name or their individual name will go after their family name. And so traditionally, right, that's the culture that Korea has been and celebrated. But recently, with a huge influx of American capitalism from the fast food chains now that are everywhere, and the commercials that come along with those fast food chains, to the, you know, K-pop sensations, a lot of it now, right, with young people is really you know, discovering who they are, and, you know, individuality, and I don't care what my father wants me to do, right? I want to be a dancer. Like, I don't care if he wants me to be a doctor. Whereas traditionally it was, oh, you know, I'm going to marry this person and I'm going to be a doctor because my father and my family have said that. So I see when I'm there this huge tension with under 30s and then, you know, over 30-year-olds. And I've kind of witnessed that play out in different forms. That's on a cultural level. Do you want me to talk economically at all?
Yeah, so like I'm familiar with, especially in countries like Egypt, America has pledged foreign aid, but oftentimes the United States will use that as a sort of diplomatic cudgel to influence Egypt to adopt certain policies that might not be the best for that country, but what America sees as being good. Yeah. Have you ever seen anything like that in Ghana or anywhere else you've traveled?
See, I'm not like, off the top of my head, I can't think of American government interference. Now, like I know, for example, right, the World Bank and the UN are essentially the complaint that other countries have is these are more or less the political and financial arm of America, right? When America contributes over 50% of the World Bank's finances, and when America somehow has, like, I don't know exactly the voting rights in the UN, but America has a disproportionate amount of power, right? It's not one country equals one vote or anything. And so, you know, when those two places, especially the World Bank, right, when they give loans and things like that, there's always stipulations attached, and people will say, and I would agree, that the World Bank gives out these loans knowing, right, if a country like Ghana was an actual company or person, there's no way a bank would give them a loan, right? They would look at their financial situation and be like, no, you're crazy, I'm not giving you anything. But the World Bank gives out these crazy loans knowing full well that the country will never be able to pay it back. And when they don't pay it back, then they get to those stipulations and say, oh, well, then I guess we'll just be in charge, you know, we'll set up these companies here, we'll do this type of, but I don't have the specific examples. I do actually have one. Valco, an aluminum company, actually helped build. Ghana couldn't afford to build the Volta Dam, which created the largest man-made lake in the world, which brought hydroelectricity to Ghana in the 60s. So Ghana couldn't fit the bill. So Valco was one of those kind of companies that, you know, America helped foot the bill, but we're just gonna, you know, put Valco here. They're gonna help you build it. They're gonna be the brains behind it, but they're gonna get X amount of the resources and X amount of the electricity, and they're gonna have free electricity to run their aluminum plant, and they're gonna have no tariffs when they export out of here. But we'll pay for everything, and Ghana, stupidly, I think, agreed to it. So that's one example. And now, 50, 60 years later, the dam is falling into complete disrepair. Valco has now left the country. There's no one there who can fix the hydroelectric dams, and Ghana finds itself in an electricity crisis that is crippling the country's economy. On another level, BP Gas discovered oil off the coast of Ghana 10 years ago. And this isn't really the political arm. This is just big business, which in my opinion is politics today. But they said, hey, we'll get all that oil out of the ground, because Ghana, you can't do it, right? You don't have any oil refineries or infrastructure to do it. We'll also fix the infrastructure along the coast free. We'll bring electricity and new roads, and we'll give you 10% of all the money that we make out of the barrels that we produce from your country. In Ghana, what are you going to say?
I mean, I would say, yeah.
Right, exactly. You say, yeah. And new roads have come, and electricity has come to these coastal villages. But now you have
oil spills.
Well, potential oil spills, but now you also have BP basically controlling a huge part of your financial sector. And what happens when, so pretty soon the lifestyle or the economic system of Ghana is going to be reliant on that money, right? They're going to start creating social systems. They have a healthcare system that they're trying to develop, and a lot of that is the money that's coming in from oil revenue. And when BP in 10 years says, you know what, we now want to give you 5%, like what is Ghana going to say? Yeah, right. And then, oh, you know what? We actually also want this, this, and this from you. So it's like these companies come in, and political entities come in, and just kind of give these sweet deals at the, on the front end that countries almost have to say yes to, but knowing that in 50 years they never really work out for the country. So I've seen that.
And so, just from your experience, specifically with government, but also with American-based companies, how would you say these policies, whether they be through the IMF, through the World Bank, or through just like American companies and coming in and doing as you've said, how do you think, or how have you witnessed this affect America's sort of image or the way it's perceived abroad?
Well, what's interesting, and so again, I'm not the right person to answer this, because Ghana and South Korea in general, and obviously there's factions of every country that hold different political beliefs, but America's very well received in both countries, which I think is part of why their influence is so great in both of the countries. And to be sure, and I can't speak really for Korea, I don't know. I know America obviously did a ton to help that country, one, first fight the war and win the war, and two, rebound, right? So I think in large part, Korea, rightfully so, feels indebted. So America's not that poorly received in Korea, especially, and what's interesting too is the older generation especially really likes where a lot of times it's the other way around, right? The younger generation thinks America's cool and they want the shiny, stuff, and the older generation says, no, we stick to our culture. But the traditional Koreans, although they want to stick to their old Confucian culture, but they still really, really hold Americans in a high regard because they remember the Korean War. In Ghana, again, there's an interesting Pew,
research?
Yeah, that Americans, Ghanaians like Americans more than Americans like Americans, the higher percentage of Ghanaians. So that's pretty interesting, yeah. And so a lot of Africa, West Africa, if you had to list who they really dislike, it goes China, then European countries. So it goes there, the new colonialists, which is really China. I mean, China does it in such a blatant way, and that's one thing. America is so good at it, right? They really are, and so they don't, and like again, they set up the IMF, they work through all these back channels that don't attach America to it, where China just comes in and says, hi, we're China, we want to build everything and take all your resources. So Chinese they really dislike right now, and then their European colonialist masters, right? They really usually dislike. Although even Ghana and England has a pretty amiable relationship. But then it would go America, you know, somewhere farther back on that line. So it's actually not as bad as you might think, or some people might think. But if you went to a lot of other countries,
it would be the other way about.
I think it would be much different, right?
Okay.
So that's just my personal experience.
Great. And so my second round of questions are primarily around issues that involve the United States specifically, and a lot of them have happened very recently. So for instance, my first question is, do you think that America's actions towards Mexico and China, specifically threats of economic sanctions, economic warfare, and just all-out hostility and threats, would be considered as imperialistic, specifically the bullying tactic that America has favored using in the country?
So yes, but I also think that their more diplomatic approach is imperialistic, right? I mean, I'm sure there's a saying there, right? Like the devil you know and the devil you don't. I don't know, something like that. Like the bullying tactic almost to me seems less threatening, right? Like in terms of long-term imperialistic results on a country and like the like now Mexico is on guard, right? Now like
they're used to it.
Yes, you know, something like that. Whereas I mean, you look at, and again, I don't know much about the history of American and Mexican relations, but you look at how America has done business in the past, and it's usually, you know, we become your friend, we offer you some sort of support in a time of need, and then we like slowly creep in, and all of a sudden you look around and, you know, there's Ford Motors everywhere, and there's, you know, Coca-Cola everywhere, and here's our new cell phone towers that we're building and infrastructure, and now, you know, so
like the Chinese way, which is currently happening.
Well, right, I mean, that's what I kind of feel like Trump is more of like the Chinese way, right? It's we come in and we say, you know, do this or else, and then, so it's certainly not going to do anything for our relationship with, you know, on a personal level with Americans and Mexicans, but I don't find it any more imperialistic than what we've always done. Yeah. It's not like, you know, Trump is our first president. And again, and this gets into my political beliefs, but I feel like politicals are just like the PR firms for what is behind the machine that is behind all of the imperialism, right? It's not, you know, the American presidents don't really care about, you know, imperialism and spreading our culture in capitalistic ways to other countries. They just kind of are
they're just like the figureheads. They're
the figureheads, yeah, that have to do the speeches and stuff like that, and so.
I've always found it interesting. It's like whenever, or rather, back when Obama was president, I'm 17 and Obama was president for 8 of those years. I found it interesting that whenever a news channel referred to something that people would consider Obama did, they always referred to it as the Obama administration, unless Obama signed an executive order, it would be the Obama administration rolled out this new policy, or the Obama administration has set out these guidelines.
Yeah.
And I always found that interesting, especially in light of the way we look at politics.
Yeah, yeah.
And so my next question is more of an internal matter in the United States. So at present, there are 4 million people who are legally American citizens and live on American soil, but are not allowed to vote in national elections, hold no representation in the House of Representatives or the Senate, and they are citizens of America's territories, those being islands like Puerto Rico, Guam, the Mariana Islands, and American Samoa. And so in 1911, these islands, specifically, I believe the case originated in the Northern Mariana Island, sorry, not Northern Marianas, but in Guam. They basically sued, saying that they were American citizens, hence they should have the right to vote. And part of the ruling consisted of the Supreme Court saying that these people were of alien races that might not be able to adhere to Anglo-Saxon principles, which basically means they weren't white.
Sure.
So my question is, would you consider that specifically, those policies and the way that's been carried out since then, imperialistic?
I mean, it certainly seems that way, right? I don't know enough. I mean, the way that you just described it, I mean, it seems kind of like the definition of yeah. So, I mean, I would say based on that, sure, yeah. But I just have never done any research or visited, or, you know what I mean? I don't know the actual history of it, so. But certainly, yeah, I would say yes right now, if I had to vote.
And it might be because the way I'm phrasing the questions, forgive me for that.
No, I mean, I think it's a pretty accurate description. So just Puerto Rico, right? I know because they're close to us, right? I know that they don't have those voting rights, and I know that that's always been kind of a point of debate and contention. But yeah, I've always looked at Puerto Rico as like the modern territories that we've colonized.
Right.
Yeah.
And so my last question specifically has to do with American influence. So at present, as you stated, America largely spearheads organizations like the World Bank and the IMF. But also, America currently houses 800 military bases and installations around the world, from Germany to Djibouti and from Japan to Iraq. Would you, taking the broad definition of imperialism simply to mean influence or the growth of economic power, would you consider America at its present state to be an empire?
It's a great question. I mean, I guess you could answer it both ways and have plenty of supporting evidence. But I mean, I guess an economic empire. Like, our tentacles stretch just as far and just as deep and just as greedy as the British Empire, 100 years ago. Like, we just do it in. So if this is neo-colonialism, we're the neo-empire, right? I would say absolutely.
Thank you for letting me interview you. It certainly has been interesting.
Cut.